Welcome. Today we're going to be talking about the earliest military experiments and CIA research on mind control. Many have heard of the CIA and U.S. military's joint-run MKUltra experiments. But today we're going to be talking about much more fascinating programs that predate MKUltra. Mind control experiments formerly known as Project Bluebird and Project Artichoke. This is the quest for the Manchurian candidate. And if you find any of this interesting at all, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. And make sure to stick around until the end, because we're going to wrap up by discussing exactly how mind control of entire populations is now currently possible, solely using artificial intelligence and big data. So with that, let's get started. In 1975, a congressional oversight committee was formed following numerous political scandals, such as Watergate and the illegal surveillance of U.S. citizens. And while the surveillance state today puts 1975 to shame, what the Church Committee uncovered was much more than wiretaps and federal peeping toms. The Congressional Church Committee is what first revealed MKUltra, the CIA-run program collaborating with the U.S. military to explore methods of mind control and behavioral engineering. And this was done using various psychedelic and psychotropic drugs for research and development of intelligence gathering and psychological warfare techniques during the Cold War, with nearly all of the experiments being conducted on unsuspecting U.S. citizens, along with the CIA and U.S. military's own personnel. So when the Church Committee was looking for illegal surveillance and found that the CIA and military were drugging U.S. citizens without their knowledge, everyone got just a little bit more upset, to say the least. MK Naomi was a similar program also revealed by the Church Committee at the time, having much of the same objectives with the inclusion of chemical and biological weapons used for assassination. For example, the infamous heart attack gun put on display for Congress. After being shot with one of the gun's darts, the victim suffers death by heart attack, leaving no residual evidence in the autopsy report. Project Bluebird was the earliest of this bunch of experiments with a focus similar to the rest. For Bluebird also aimed to use drugs for information extraction and interrogation purposes. Project Bluebird began in the late 1940s and is the origin of the famous truth serum, amytal sodium and benzodrine. Amytal sodium is the same chemical famously used in lethal injection to euthanize death row inmates. But rather than give someone enough to kill them, the idea is just to bring them to the brink of death's door and see what they tell you. But unlike the later MKUltra experiments, this was done on prisoners of war, double agents, Japanese, Koreans, Soviets, etc. And aside from developing interrogation techniques to extract information from these individuals, Project Bluebird also had other objectives as well. Other goals of Project Bluebird included determining whether it's possible through chemicals, drugs, and/or hypnotism to create Manchurian candidates. Well, what is a Manchurian candidate? A Manchurian candidate refers to a person who has been manipulated by external forces to perform actions that may go against their own interests or loyalties, often without their awareness, and done so entirely covertly. The term was first coined by a Richard Condon novel over a decade after Project Bluebird, later being adapted into a Frank Sinatra film. Frank Sinatra's daughter actually would then remake the movie decades later, starring Denzel Washington. The military applications of Project Bluebird went far beyond defensive activities like interrogation and information extraction. Project Bluebird went into the realm of offensive actions, aiming to create tactics capable of manipulating the personality and cognition of soldiers and civilians until conditioned into committing acts of terror, all while they maintain complete amnesia, and all at the drop of a dime, exactly when their paramanipulators desire. Some of these acts of terror, which Project Bluebird sought these Manchurian candidates for, were the intentional crashing of airplanes, wrecking of trains, etc. Government documents assert that these experiments on the interrogation side of Project Bluebird were a success. But while these drugs may be effective in military settings, we now know that any, quote, truth serums and, quote, lack reliability in democratic judicial systems because of increased suggestibility, distorted perceptions, etc. Mainly because the person is barely alive and all. So this has led to false confessions over the years with just as many legal and ethical concerns. But while the interrogation side of Project Bluebird was mostly deemed a success, the Manchurian candidate side of controlling them physically and mentally was still left unanswered. Here we see the motives behind these experiments being for more than national security. We see that these aims were also for profit. This is mentioned a couple times throughout these government documents and is the most glaring concern of the military-industrial complex still to this day. And with the last documents of Bluebird being from the early 1950s, this leads us to Project Artichoke. What was Project Artichoke? And what makes Project Artichoke different than its successors and predecessor? Project Artichoke started in the early 1950s, at the same time Bluebird presumably ended, sharing much of the same objectives, but having more of a focus on the unanswered Bluebird problem of how to create Manchurian candidates and control them over long distances, adding assassination to this list of terror, which these experiments hoped to achieve by proxy. And for this reason, Project Artichoke is central to the story of Project Bluebird and the quest for the Manchurian candidate. And there's one other distinction between Bluebird and Artichoke. While both aimed to use chemicals, drugs, and/or hypnotism for information extraction, the focus of Project Artichoke was not so much on interrogation. Instead, it aimed to perfect the military and intelligence community's information extraction from couriers. And what does this mean? Who are these information couriers? At the time of these early programs, prior to MKUltra, these government documents on Artichoke reveal that the military was capable of hypnotizing military and civilian personnel, planting sensitive information in their subconscious, only for those subjects to travel long distances and be re-hypnotized for the information's extraction, all being done without the subject ever having access to this information in their own subconscious. But what wasn't understood at the time of these programs was whether another hypnotist could extract the same information on behalf of Western adversaries. The Artichoke team discovered that during hypnotism, by first regressing the subject to a previous point in their life and planting the information there, for example, age 30, Western adversaries could not extract it unless they knew the time period where the information resides in their subconscious. Project Artichoke included more than just hypnosis, chemicals, and biological agents. There were actually many other areas of research to induce suggestible cognitive states, including sleep deprivation and other techniques such as gas, sound, light, electricity, heat, cold, fatigue, and lobotomy. What is lobotomy? Lobotomy was a surgical procedure that involved cutting nerve pathways in the brain, essentially turning someone into a docile, impressionable, and a very nearly incapacitated zombie using a steel spike. And while eugenicists and the mental hygiene movement pioneered this in the early 20th century, these barbaric practices continued well after World War II as a preventative measure to treat mental illness. And this is despite eugenics having left its stain on the Holocaust. We now generally don't believe that removing brain tissue near the frontal lobe is the most humane way to treat mental health conditions, especially considering lobotomies often led to dementia, epilepsy, and death. But because it left patients emotionally blunted with reduced personality and intellect, lobotomy was not off the table as being potentially weaponizable to create Manchurian candidates. And if you'd like to know more about the eugenicists and mental hygiene movement, which spearheaded these barbaric practices, check out my book titled History of Behavioral Engineering, Eugenics, the Mental Hygiene Movement, and the Tavistock Institute, in bookstores now. And you can find the link to all my books in the description. Also within Project Artichoke, a later memo adds electricity, supersonic vibrations, total isolation, forced morphine addiction withdrawal, and sleep-inducing machines in order to condition the subjects in these experiments. Anything that affected the brain and cognition was to be an area of study. According to a memo from 1953, it instructs, quote, "No area of human knowledge is to be left unexplored in connection with the Artichoke program," end quote. But by far, the most documented and discussed aspect of Artichoke was hypnotism. According to memorandums and documents from Artichoke, the team involved in these experiments were comprised of a small handful of the best hypnotists in the world. In 1952, upon these experiments changing departments within the CIA, the scope of Artichoke broadened outside of laboratory settings towards operational conditions in the field. According to the documents, finding these individuals to undertake these experiments was difficult because most in the field of hypnotism remained dogmatic, refusing to do field research out of controlled environments, even in the face of the military's definitive advancements. These joint CIA/military programs break down hypnotism into a few categories. The first is the most common, which everyone is probably familiar with: direct hypnotism with the subject in a complete sleep-like trance while the hypnotist plants information and thoughts into their subconscious. According to one of the world's leading hypnotists on the Artichoke team, quote, "If direct control is wanted, and particularly without reinforcement, perhaps 12 hours would be the most you could expect, and even then, the possibility exists that the person under hypnosis might suddenly be awakened by some external stimuli," end quote. Another category of hypnotism in these experiments is something that the documents refer to as narco-hypnotism. This is a combination of chemicals and or drugs used to induce suggestibility during hypnotism. But narco-hypnotism was primarily used for experiments regarding intelligence extraction because, quote, "the stupor which ensues does not in every case permit as deep a stage of hypnotism," end quote, and, quote, "is very difficult to control," end quote, whereby experiments for more clandestine work, such as creating Manchurian candidates and intelligence couriers, was done in the absence of drugs and using the next category of hypnotism: post-hypnotics. Post-hypnotics is the period of time following the information and thoughts being planted into a subject's subconscious during hypnotism. The documents continue by explaining that, quote, "properly used post-hypnotics will last 20 years. They can be made more effective by reinforcement from time to time. Post-hypnotics are not affected by time or travel or distance away from the person who placed the post-hypnotic. As a rule, Post-hypnotics should be 100% effective in good subjects, and they would certainly be more effective than a person operating under direct hypnotic control, since a person in a hypnotic trance can suddenly be brought out of it for various reasons, particularly after many hours, while a post-hypnotic will always remain strong, end quote. And for this reason, post-hypnotics has the largest focus in Artichoke, with direct hypnosis used to set the stage, so to speak, for after the subjects awaken. But as per the Artichoke team, post-hypnotics can occur in a subject who hasn't even been under direct hypnosis. And these methods are not even exclusive to one-on-one hypnosis. These documents discuss, quote, mass hypnosis methods, end quote, through, quote, entertainment, end quote, which can achieve these effects for support or to manufacture dissent. It explains that a large aspect of hypnosis focuses on manipulation of personality through, quote, relaxing techniques, end quote, and, quote, about 18 different approaches to individuals ranging from fear to anxiety to deception, etc., end quote. And again, I want to make something very clear. These documents don't just discuss the need for these ethically concerning experiments be done for national security concerns. It mentions many times that these, quote, efforts will be profitable, end quote. And this is not simply conjecture. The earliest public relations and advertising methods came from reverse engineering psychological warfare techniques created in the early 20th century. Figures within the defense community, such as Edward Bernays, spearheaded these efforts to stimulate the economy following World War I. Tactics attributed with creating consumerism as we still know it today. For the same tactics used to engineer a thirst for war and call to arms is also used to convince populations to spend their last dollar on something they don't even need. Project Bluebird, followed by Project Artichoke, was the earliest Western military research and development into cognitive warfare that exists on record. Some refer to this as mind control. No government documents exist from Project Bluebird nor Project Artichoke showing field exercises that succeeded in creating Manchurian candidates, only that it was possible through various techniques of the Artichoke team. But today, it's official. The U.S. military, NATO, and allied forces can now create Manchurian candidates through mind control by targeting personality. The objectives of Project Artichoke has finally been achieved all these years later. But behavior change science has shifted since those early days using chemicals, electricity, and other antiquated practices. Today, mind control is achieved and Manchurian candidates are created solely using artificial intelligence and big data. I was the very first to reveal exactly how this is done, along with its harmful effects on democracy and mental health when used in both offensive and defensive military settings. As we've talked about extensively on this channel, for less than a decade now, the term mind control has taken on another name within military circles and the defense community, now formally known as cognitive warfare and strategic communications. And just like back then, aside from its warfare applications, these military efforts have also shown to be profitable. Today, these effects on cognition and how populations perceive information, people, and events are achieved by the unregulated influence industry known as strategic communications, or Stratcom. These private Stratcom companies work in all sectors, from politics and advertising to military and defense, to achieve these effects on cognitive brain function. So while cognitive warfare refers to these activities when used in military settings, cognitive operations are not exclusive to the military ward. And just like Project Bluebird and Project Artichoke, Effects are still achieved through fear, anxiety, and deception, tailoring campaigns around metrics of personality. Except with the advent of predictive analytics, data is now used to accurately determine those traits and how best to affect them through the internet. And using these contemporary tactics to create Manchurian candidates was officially achieved in 2017 by NATO Stratcom. In a 2017 field exercise, NATO was able to make military soldiers who were briefed on information security to defect from their military, give up sensitive information, and cause matters of national security, all at the precise time that the Stratcom team wanted, solely using artificial intelligence and easily acquired internet data with no hacking whatsoever. Here's the current NATO Stratcom director, Janice Sartz, explaining this military field exercise.
War has always been about attempting to change the behavior of the other party. We've always attempted to do so through violence, but as our knowledge of human being societies increase, as our technology ability to reach into the other societies also increase, we're increasingly talking about not only change of behavior through violence, but also changing the behaviors through issuing a number of signals to the opponent in the military conflict to enable this behavior change. And if we think of some of the current new technologies that are coming in, we see that pattern develop. And the shift that we see happening is the attack not only for disruption of a given service, but an attack to have impact on the cognitive space, on how people perceive. So that is the reality today. But let us try to see where is that all going into the kind of foreseeable, as much as we can, future. So one of the things, and I think the biggest shifts we have seen, is the emergence of value of data. The other element on data that I want to share is another experiment we've done even further back in past 4 years ago. And that was the question whether the data allows you to change what people do in real life situations. So we attempted to see whether we can change what soldiers do during a military exercise, and we were able to make professional soldiers briefed on information security to disobey orders, leave the positions they're supposed to defend, reconnaissance units to reveal their GPS locations at the time we wanted. Just from understanding from a data set how they think as humans, what they are, what they believe, what they trust, what they do like, what they don't like. And from that understanding, kind of issue the, what we called effect that shifted the behavior. That is where we're going. And that is where we will be ending at some point in time, sooner rather than later. That big data that is kind of identifiable with an individual, combined with a kind of efficient AI systems, will enable manipulation and behavior change of larger masses of people. And the technology is being fine-tuned as we speak, both in a kind of election setup, but also in some authoritarian systems for citizen control setup. That's a snippet of what is the way we are starting to see the change of our ability by scraping or using the digital to establish the physical and use it in our advantage in a conflict. And that is, I think, something that will be a big part of the future conflicts. And that is the one that has a capacity from that digital establish the physical reality will have a dominance in the battlefield. And that will per kind of military and kinetic action, but has also, remember these data importance, it will have also on the cognitive scale a significant ability to dominate.